evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out on a beautiful rainy day. My name is Marty Roth. I'm the president here at the University of Charleston, and we're really delighted that you're here, but even more delighted that we were able to arrange for Dr. Byron Johnson to join us for what's been a great day on campus. So I had the pleasure of meeting up with Dr. Johnson this morning for breakfast and getting to know him a bit, and I'm pleased to say we have a true scholar in our midst. He's currently running a extremely successful center at Baylor University. While doing that, he's affiliated with some of the best universities in the country, such as Duke University. Is a faculty scholar in the Center for Spirituality, Theology, and Health at Duke, senior advisor in the Religious Freedom Research Project at Georgetown, senior fellow at an institute at Princeton, and the list goes on for quite a bit. He has had previous positions at Vanderbilt University, as well as the University of Pennsylvania. We invited Dr. Johnson to join us this evening because of his deep expertise in areas such as spirituality, the role of religious organizations in criminal justice. No surprise to anybody here in the audience, we are focusing a lot of our collective attention on some of the drug addiction, drug abuse, drug recovery issues, which are really endemic to the state of West Virginia. And it's really a privilege to have Dr. Johnson here, who kind of thinks about these issues from the context of how can spirituality make a difference in people's behavior, both in their propensity to get involved in drug addiction behavior, but how can spirituality help them climb out of that condition and get their lives back on a more productive path. Dr. Johnson is also a prolific author. His most recent book is called The Quest for Purpose. He's also written about the Angola Prison Seminary, and I love the title of this book from 2011. I need to get a copy, More God, Less Crime. So we're really delighted that you're here this evening, Dr. Johnson. I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It's a beautiful area. I enjoyed my time today, both with the students and with folks on campus. And I just finished a meeting with local religious leaders where I was learning from them. It certainly wasn't the other way around, but it was great to be with them to talk about some of these difficult issues that every place in the country is struggling with. So let me begin. So to start off, Marty was right. One of the things that we like to do is to study the role of religion as a protective factor. How does religion keep people from initiating all kinds of harmful behaviors? And so these are just some of the publications. I'm going to give you, I'll make this whole PowerPoint available to you in case any of you would like to have access to it and the slides that come along with it. But these are just recent publications that look at the role of religion in helping people not initiate drug use. And so there's a significant literature that says it's very protective. Religiosity is also protected when it comes to something like suicide, which is also increased dramatically. It's not just an opiate epidemic. There's also, if you look at suicide now, the second leading cause of death among adults between the age of 18 and 35. And so it doesn't get as much publicity, but it's also a rather tragic situation that we find ourselves in. These are studies that we've done that look at religion, spirituality, and pro-social behavior. One of my concerns is that we spend too much time looking at the bad news. There's plenty of bad news. But why is it that so many people actually do the right kinds of things? People that give their time away, people that are generous with their gifts and their talents and their finances, people that generally obey the law. Most people do. Why is that? So we're interested in studying the other side, not why is it that some people will commit a crime, because that's a small percentage of the population. Why is it that most people don't? commit crimes. So we want to understand the pro-social side of things, and what we find is, yet again, that faith seems to be prominent in that equation. That was the opening slide that you saw a few minutes ago. I don't know if anybody can recognize the person in that picture. It's a young Chuck Colson when he was in prison for being convicted as part of the Watergate scandal. And the reason why I put that in there is that when he got out of prison, a lot of people find God in prison, you know. It's called jailhouse religion. But I've spent the last 30 years studying jailhouse religion, and for some folks, it is just that. But for a lot of people, it's a pretty authentic thing. And for Chuck, it was, because when he got out of prison in 1976, he founded something called Prison Fellowship, which is the largest prison ministry in the world. And they reached out to me to do some research for that organization, and I did. The first study I did, I looked at Bible studies, because they had 3 big programs that they would do in prisons. And I found that 2 of the programs didn't have much of an effect at all, but their Bible study did. And these are led by volunteers that go into prisons and just work with inmates 1 hour a week. And so I tracked those guys while they were in the Bible studies, and then once they got out of prison for another year, I tracked them. And believe it or not, they were less likely to be rearrested, and it was published in the Journal Justice Quarterly, which is one of the top journals in the field. And that led Prison Fellowship to think, rightly so, if a modest intervention like a Bible study could be helpful, what if you could do a much more significant intervention? How about creating a faith-based prison where you would have religious programs every day, during the day, not just an hour-long Bible study? And so they launched this program in Texas in 1997 called the Interchange Freedom Initiative, and I got major funding to do a study of that. And it was released in 2003 at the White House. You see a lot of prisoners there next to me, and that's George W. Bush was in the White House at the time, and to his left is another prisoner. The program was remarkably successful. I was telling the religious leaders a few moments ago that half the prison was faith-based and half the prison was general population. And the idea was to keep the faith-based side quarantined from the general population so as not to be contaminated. But the inmates, as you might expect, started breaking the rules and started doing Bible studies in the general population. And after a short period of time, the entire prison became faith-based. So I tracked the guys for 2 years post-release and found that they were significantly less likely to be either rearrested or reincarcerated. And you know, there were a lot of factors that went into that, but one of the main factors was that they received a mentor while they were in prison that they were able to kind of bond to, that stayed with them once they got out. And this is a huge advantage over other prisoners who don't have the benefit of something like that. So yes, the program had its own effects, but the role of mentoring was very significant. And inmates that were paroled early, because at the time of this study there was severe overcrowding in Texas, so they had to let out thousands of prisoners. In Texas we have about 150,000 prisoners and over 100 institutions. And so a lot of the guys got out of this program before they could complete the program. So I compared, it's a natural experiment, I compared the guys that got out early on parole to the guys that actually completed the program. If you got out early, you were 4 times more likely to be rearrested than guys that completed the program. So then I went back, and that study I did on the Bible studies, those were all prisoners in 3 different prisons in New York. I went back years later to do a follow-up study to see if the effect lasted longer, and it did. So it was pretty remarkable to me that a small intervention seemed to have that effect, and I published it in that same journal. And then Marty was right, I wrote this book that kind of summarizes about 20 years worth of research looking at the role that religion plays in crime and delinquency. And so it's kind of like one-stop shopping. These are 2 studies that we've done in the last 6 or 7 years. The reason why I put them up there is that one of them is, the bottom one is a return on investment study, and the top one is a cost-benefit analysis. So it's one thing for me to get up here and to say, guess what, they participate in this program, they're less likely to be rearrested. But what does that mean in everyday language? What does that mean to the economy? What does it mean in dollars and cents? So we evaluated that program in Texas. Then there was a program in Minneapolis that was the same thing, another faith-based prison. We studied it, and the controls were even tighter. So we were able to follow them to see how well they did post-release, and you know, are they paying taxes, are they paying child support, et cetera, et cetera. That program we found saved taxpayers $8,300 per participant in Minnesota. So now you have people that are in the state legislature that are taking notice of something that can save money. The bottom program is called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. This is where business executives go into prison, interview inmates that have entrepreneurial skills that want to participate in the program, and then they begin to mentor them to help them develop a business plan. Those business plans are then scored by college students in universities across the country. About half the Ivy League schools are participating in the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. And of course, Baylor is one of the main universities that participates in this. And then these guys come out and are able to start their own companies. So if you think, I think this is how we need to be thinking when we're thinking of where we are today and what do we need to do to change some of our problems. They seem to be so drastic. We were talking earlier that just getting a driver's license is a difficult thing for a guy coming out of prison. Getting a job, you're a convicted felon, it's not easy. Getting a place to live is not easy. How about a prison program that teaches a guy how to start your own business? That's what this program does. And so we evaluated it on the ROI type analysis, and it's off the charts. It's one of the most innovative things I've ever seen. And about 99% of the guys coming out of prison make it over the long haul in this program. So you're more likely to be employed and living in Houston if you go through this program as a prisoner than you are in the general population, because the employment rate isn't quite 1%. And these are just a series of studies that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years on what we're now calling positive criminology. Criminology is not the best term. Antisocial behavior is not the best term, and I told you we like to study, you know, things a little bit more positively, so we study prosocial behavior. Well, positive criminology is a way of thinking things like that. You know, how can you think about restoring people's lives? And you may have heard of something called restorative justice. That's a major movement all across the world, really. And how can we begin to think more along the lines of restorative justice, transformation, than, you know, lock them up, throw away the key, without any kind of programs. More positive spin, and these are just more publications coming out. These are the ones that we've been doing that hit the target for tonight. We've been studying drug addicts in Akron, Ohio for the last 8 years or so. And we've been tracking them over time in a controlled study with a control group, experimental group, to see what might make a difference for people that are addicted to drugs. And I won't go into great detail on this tonight, but one of the things that we find that makes a difference for some of these guys is having some kind of religious transformation. But it's not enough. A lot of these guys have relapses even after they've had transformations. So we're not trying to discount the role of spiritual transformation. It does have an effect. But for a lot of them, the real magic is when they connect their faith to their neighbor. How do they live with other people? For a lot of people that are in, you know, a situation where they become addicted to alcohol or to drugs, you know, it's a slippery slope. They isolate themselves, they self-medicate. Instead of turning outwardly, they turn inwardly. And the one thing that they aren't is other-minded. And in this particular program that we studied in Ohio, the guys who had some kind of a spiritual transformation and were involved in acts of service to other addicts, they're the ones that stay sober. So it's kind of like, you know, faith, you've heard faith without works. Well, faith without service doesn't do a whole lot. the two have to kind of come together. And you think that sounds basic, but for folks in the business of studying addictions, it's kind of a breakthrough finding. And so we've been really happy about this. It actually helps inmates and offenders that have social anxiety disorder. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people suffer with social anxiety disorder. Well, if you're in a counseling situation where you have to be in front of people and you have to speak because you're an addict, how do you do that when you suffer from severe social anxiety disorder? What we found, and we had a good number of people that met that qualification, that if they are involved in faith and if they are involved in acts of service, it kind of washes out the effect of social anxiety altogether. So kind of another important finding that we just stumbled onto. It also combats this whole issue of social isolation, which is one of the key problems of why we have an epidemic. That I know we live in a society where we have everything that would lead you to believe that social isolation isn't a problem, but it is a big problem. This is our most recent study, and I wanted to highlight it tonight, even though it's not necessarily a study on addicts. It's completely relevant. So this is the Louisiana State Penitentiary, located in the swamps of Louisiana, surrounded by swamps and the Mississippi River. It's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there, I promise you. This is a really backward place. You drive and drive and drive, and then the road ends at the prison. It's also known as Angola. It's just called Angola. And the reason why is it's located on the grounds of a plantation. And all the slaves came from Angola, Africa. So it's one of the only prisons that's located on a foreign plantation. It's 18,000 acres. It's massive. It's a maximum security facility housing over 6,300 prisoners. And the reason why that's important is because of this. Most maximum security prisons are very small because the security is so tough. And so to have a prison, this is by far the largest maximum security prison in the world. And so when we heard that they had that many inmates, it's like, okay, this is unbelievable. It's also been known as the most corrupt prison in America. It's known as the bloodiest prison in America, where corruption and violence were the norm for many, many decades. This is just some typical cells in Angola. So this guy right here, if any of you ever watched that silly show called The Dukes of Hazzard, okay, I'm not proud to admit that I've seen it. Remember there was that character, Boss Hogg? Or are we filming this? I shouldn't have said this. It's going to get back to the warden. Well, that's Boss Hogg. This is the warden. He went there in 1995. This is not a destination job, okay? I mean, you took a destination job, but he didn't. And he thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to a prison where stabbings are a common occurrence, suicides are common. They don't give me enough money to run this place, and it's a working farm. They grow all the food for all the prisons in the state of Louisiana at this facility. And so he had the bright idea of starting a seminary in the prison. And so that's what he did. He went there in 1995. He went to the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary and said, would you do a campus in our facility? And the people there, for some reason, said that they would. So they started a Bible college, the same curriculum that you would get in the seminary, and they launched this in 1995, all privately funded. And so that's the seminary there. And the warden, after a number of years, called me. Of course, I couldn't understand a word he was saying. The accent was so strong. It's a shame it wasn't, one of these things where you had a script down below so you could understand what he was saying. But it was something like this: why aren't we getting any recognition for what we're doing? Have you heard of what's happened here? I said, well, I actually have heard some stories. And he goes, how come we don't get any respect for what we're doing? This used to be the most violent prison, and now no one's getting killed. There are no suicides at all. And I said, well, most of these are anecdotal accounts. accounts that you're giving me, and I haven't seen any data. And I said, so, he goes, well, what would we need to do to get recognized? I said, well, you need a major study there. And so, to make a long story short, we got major funding to launch a 5-year study with a team of 5 scholars, and we just basically hung out at this place for 5 years. And you get to know the people when you talk to them for 5 years, and you survey them and interview them. So we did what we call life history interviews that lasted an hour or 2 hours with people. And then we talked to them again, and then we'd survey them over time to see how they respond to questions. And then we would look at official data. Are they getting in trouble? Are they staying out of trouble? So this was our approach. This is the seminary. This is just a class. By the way, I forgot to say, all of these guys, virtually all of them are serving life with no hope for parole. So again, it's kind of a contradiction. Here you are in Louisiana, a very punitive state, where they're doing something that's kind of, cutting edge, and that no place else is doing. So this is the Bible College. This is the library in the Bible College. This is just another class. And of course, you can see there, the guys are older at this prison than most prisons because they're serving life with no hope for parole. So we'll hit the pause button here for a second. This is an inmate pastor. And he's speaking on a Sunday. It could be, I don't remember if this was a Sunday morning, because they actually have 29 churches in this prison. And the church, the inmate church, we did not know when we started the study. It had existed for decades, but it was very small. And there were some inmate-led congregations. But when they came and started this college, this seminary, they started training ministers. And they would come out of seminary and they would start congregations. So it really put wind in the sails of what was a weak church. And at that time, going back, let's say, 60 years, the only inmates that went to church were black inmates. It was just a black thing. White folks did not go to church. But that all changed when they started this Bible college. So these inmate ministers, it's really fascinating. They get special IDs. So this is an ID. This is Ron Hicks. He was locked up when he was 19, serving life. And they give him these cards, which allows the minister to go anywhere in the prison at all. And it's 18,000 acres, so there's all these different housing units. They're allowed to go anywhere because they have a special dispensation. And the warden, of course, is the guy behind this. So if you're a correctional officer, you try and hassle this guy from going to minister to someone who's grieving because they just lost their parents recently, you could get fired for that. And so this is what sets Angola apart from all other prisons in the United States, are these inmate-led congregations. So we started studying the Bible college, and we started studying the congregations that we didn't even know existed as a part of the study. And I will say, we launched a similar study in Texas. So simultaneously, we're in Louisiana, but we're also in Texas, because in Texas, they tried to adopt this program with one difference. No congregations. It's illegal in Texas. So they took a different model, which I'll get to in just a second. So this is the cemetery. About 3 inmates die a month of old age, typically. They're not getting out. So it's kind of interesting, because I've never been in a prison where that many people die. But you can imagine, and just do the math over time. I mean, we interviewed a number of guys that were in their 80s, and they had been in prison for well over 60, 65 years. And so they're dying in there. This is a casket made. They have so many industrial programs, vocational programs. It is probably the most innovative vocational prison in America. So they have all kinds of certifications that inmates can complete. It's really rather ironic, because they're not getting out. But they can do air conditioning, refrigeration, transmission, you name it. They're training them, and so there are a lot of real craftsmen in there, and they sell their products at their annual rodeo, which people come from all over the South to attend the rodeo and buy products that are made by inmates, and then that goes back into inmate programs. But this particular casket, the reason why I'm showing you this casket is it's the casket that Billy Graham was buried in. And some of you may have recognized it because it was in the rotunda of the Capitol when he died. And the Graham family had been going to Angola back in the day when they would allow outsiders to come in and do evangelistic services in the prison. They don't allow it anymore because the inmates leave everything. And they're 10 times better than anybody from the outside. And so Billy Graham and his wife were both buried in these caskets. They cost $217 to make. It's just plywood with comforter linings that were purchased at Walmart. And so once this came out, that Billy Graham was buried in this casket, born 99 years ago. I had all kinds of people contacting me because they knew we had this book that had just come out. And they're saying, I want to be buried in one of those caskets. Can you contact the Angola prison? I'm saying, no. Unless your name is Billy or Ruth, you're not getting one of those caskets. I wrote a piece on it, by the way. If you just Google it, there's a piece that I wrote on the whole Billy Graham thing. This is the hospice unit. And this is, an inmate serving life that's taking care of another inmate that will soon be dying. So it's one of the only prisons I know that has a hospice unit that's maybe 4 times the size of this room. And you have to wonder about how any of this makes sense to incarcerate people that long, that they're having to spend all this money as they're at the end of their life. But this is just a vocational program. The guy in the middle there is serving life. Kind of very articulate guy. And this is just one of the places where the inmate ministers have their own offices. And then this next slide, well, not this, but I'm getting close. So this is just one of the churches in the prison. This is another one. All paid for with private dollars. This is another one. And this is the most recent one. It's a Catholic church that was built with private donations. And so the interesting thing is it's this incredibly ecumenical environment. So it's the only place where I know that inmates attend different congregations. So I'm a member of the Presbyterian church, but I also attend a Baptist church on Tuesday nights. And on Wednesday nights, I attend a Methodist church. And it's just like, I've never heard of such a thing. And so very ecumenical, even though the seminary is itself led by the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We spent many, many hours talking to people there. It doesn't have a Baptist feel to it as much as it has this ecumenical feel to it. And these are missionaries that are sent from Angola to other prisons. And so that's what those little plaques, those little names are. And that's what Texas said. Texas said, we want to start a Bible college too, because we want to do it bigger in Texas. And so they went to the maximum security prison, the Darrington unit, and they said, we won't allow congregations in Texas, and neither will any other state, by the way. And it goes back to this idea that the trustee system, which allowed inmates to supervise other inmates, became very, very abusive in the past corrections history. And so because of that, they won't allow inmates to have their own congregations. But in Louisiana, they can do whatever they want. It's an entity unto itself. And so what Texas said is, we'll do a Bible college, and then we'll send them out as missionaries. And the goal is to send out missionaries to all 100+ prisons. And that's what they've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years in Texas. And the early returns are quite positive, shockingly, because they're just sending like 2 or 3 guys at a time to a prison with 4,000 inmates. And it would be hard to imagine that they could have an effect, but we're actually seeing an effect. So this is a short 3-minute video, I think, and my guru genius over here is going to make sure it works.
before prison, I never heard the gospel. Not one time.
How the seminaries not only taught me more about the Word of God, but it really taught me more about worship and getting to know that I'm worth something in Him.
Morton King said in the first meeting, he said to his ward, associate wardens who were there, he said, we're going to do this. If you want to do this with us, good. If you don't want to do this with us, then we'll get somebody in your place to do it. And with that kind of support, you know, the guys started paying attention.
Sitting in that cell, realize that you've lost your family, you've lost your confidence, you've lost your ability to say, I know best. You can't fool yourself anymore.
After I heard the programs here, it was like, man, I gotta get in there. I gotta get in there. Because I want to be able to get all the tools and all the skills to help perfect what God got for my life.
But they have the same transforming experience. They have the same call of God in their lives that we have here. And they're living it out day by day.
There's just so much pain, you know. There's a lot of people, you know, people are in prison because they've committed crimes, but my experience is most of the people in prison have been hardly treated through most of their lives as well. So, you know, you really don't want to fail to take that into consideration. You know, a person's own history and the abuse that they've suffered. And it's not an excuse, it's just reality. So you want to help them become well so that they can become healers too.
You know, these inmate ministers have just saturated the prison, and you can say, you know, it's the church. You know, we keep saying inmate ministers in the Bible college, but it's the church. But what the Bible college has done, with those numbers, you see 29 pastors. You know, they've equipped the church to do God's work and to convict.
This is the one place where I've seen the church being the church in such a way that it's transforming the culture in which it exists. I mean, in a lot of places where I've been in ministry, the culture has had more impact on the church than the church has had on the culture. That's not been true in England. And we're beginning to see that in other prisons as well.
So, one of the things that we wanted to do to see what was really happening was to look at inmates that participated in the Bible college, inmates that didn't participate in the Bible college, inmates that participated in congregations and inmates that didn't participate in congregations, and then inmates that did both. So that's what we did in a series of analyses. And you know, the findings were clear-cut. Involvement in either was associated with fewer infractions. People were more likely to do pro-social things, less likely to get in trouble if they went to a congregation or attended a congregation or were in a Bible college, and if they did both, it was even more powerful. So then, you know, based on the studies we were doing in Ohio on addicts, we started pulling some of those instruments in while we were doing the Angola study. And what we were beginning to find was the same thing. That guys who were serving life in prison with no hope of getting out were basically investing their lives in other inmates and basically giving their lives away and finding their lives as they gave their lives away. So we were able to document over time what we call identity transformation. You know, we use the term rehabilitation. Well, what is rehabilitation? I mean, for so many people, it's really difficult to reconcile an ugly past. That one inmate said it's not an excuse, but he came from an abusive home. You know, so it's not rocket science that he wound up in prison. And so for a lot of people, they've done these horrible things, and they've lived in denial, just like addicts can be in denial too. But the experience that they've had allows them to say, you know, that I did do those horrible things, but I was a different person back then, and I have become a different person. And I'm not happy about who I was, but I'm encouraged about who I've become. And this becomes a powerful story, and you might think, well, you know, you heard that, but did you hear it over time? The reality is you do hear it over time. And I'm glad we did a study with guys serving life, because you could always argue they're doing this to get an early release. Okay? I've heard that for years, and in fact, we don't find evidence of that very much. But here, of course, they're not getting out. So, you know, if you think about it, what's the advantage of doing all these pro-social things if it's not going to help you get out of here? And the reality is, we found much more happiness and joy in the lives of these guys than we see on the streets. And I say that after spending 5 years locked up with them. You spend that much time, you see them on the weekends, you see them during the week, you see them all the time. And so it's not like you're going to be fooled by someone you interview once every blue moon. So what we saw was this identity transformation and what we call redemptive narratives, where people are able to rewrite their whole life. I mean, there may be some of you in this room that would love to be able to rewrite your life, and that's what they're doing. This is the book that we wrote on Angola. Thankfully, it's received incredible reviews from secular scholars, not people of faith, that have read it and said this is important for the field of criminology, and that we may need to rethink how we're doing business. And you know, it's kind of interesting because typically when you're looking for innovation, you don't go to Louisiana. You know, you might go to California or to New York, but instead you have delegations flocking every week. There would be some delegation from some state, from the governor's office, all the way through to faith-based groups that wanted to come bottle up whatever it was that was happening here. And the problem was the warden didn't even know. The warden said, go start a Bible college. It changes everything. And we kept saying, you know, warden, that's not what we found. What we found was that the Bible college empowered inmates to serve other inmates and to create congregations and then to create ministries, multiple ministries within the congregations, grief counseling, sidewalk counseling, suicide watch, benevolence ministries, inmates that make like 17 cents an hour tithe. I mean, there are indigent people in prison, and there are people that are better off that give, you know, toothpaste to other inmates that don't have it. It really is quite extraordinary what we saw at Angola. And in Texas, where the study is being replicated, we're finding similar effects. Now, this is a newer story that some of you may have, you've heard of MS-13. It's probably the most violent gang in the world. They're everywhere. And this is a copy of a major story in The Economist. This is not a religious publication. And yet, what's happening in El Salvador is that there's this massive spiritual awakening taking place in the prisons. No one understands what's going on there, but it's completely inmate-led. So it's led us to believe, along with the studies that we're doing with addicts in Ohio, where addicts are working with addicts, and in Louisiana and Texas, where you have inmates working with other inmates, that these indigenous kinds of things may be more powerful than we've ever thought before. And if that's the case, how can we begin to think creatively to replicate and to scale some of these things? I have a grant proposal in right now at the Templeton Foundation to do a study in El Salvador of this particular project. My wife is hoping it doesn't get funded. She's tired of me interviewing people in the middle of the night in Skid Row places. But it's interesting, they have sent people down here just to, you know, like journalists, to talk to these guys. And you know what they're saying? Your only ticket out of MS-13 is to become a Pentecostal because the gang will let you out. Otherwise, there's no way to get out. And you better be authentic, because if you're not authentic, they'll kill you. They're very moral. This is just, this is one of the guys, this is from the New York Times, a member of MS-13 that I think became a Pentecostal, and basically saying it's the only way to get out of the gang and survive. So that is it. Just some of the latest findings that I think give us some glimpse of what might be happening out there. It's maybe not the solution that people are thinking of, but just like that Prison Entrepreneurship program is a complete paradigm shift from how we think about things. I'm wondering if we may need to think creatively about things that we might be doing to combat the opioid crisis, along with other things that we see that are problematic. And our system does need reforming. I think this is one of the cool things that's happened in the last 5 years, is that finally on both sides of the aisle there's enormous agreement that our system needs reform. The question is, how do we go about doing it? And there has been some movement in Washington recently, but that's only at the federal level. And the federal level represents just a very small part of the overall criminal justice system in the U.S. It doesn't take into account what's happening in the states and at the local county level. So with that, maybe we could open up for Q&A.
Anyone who would like to ask a question, please use one of the microphones. We're recording this session, and that way those in the audience or watching later hear the question.
Don't be bashful. This is our website. Feel free to go there, and a lot of the research that I just mentioned, it's all available. You can download it. Yes, ma'am.
Given the sort of anti-religion, secularism bias in this country, correctly, are there issues related to getting funding for these kinds of programs?
Yes, that's a great question. That's why all these programs are privately funded. Everyone. What I did, when I showed you one of the pictures of the prison, there was some signage. I don't know if you saw it, but it said you're entering the land of new beginnings on one side, and then on the other part of the signage, it had a paraphrase of Philippians 3:13. Well, the ACLU threatened a lawsuit because there was this scripture reference at a state prison. So they took some paint and they put paint over the reference to Philippians 3:13, but left the scripture. The ACLU said, it's good enough for us. So here again, I think it helps to be creative. But there is this kind of hostility. So one of the things I was sharing with the students this morning was that if you just scan the internet, and I invite you to do this, stories on religion. And what you will find is about 50 negative stories to every positive story. And it's just kind of remarkable when you actually look at all the research now, literally thousands of studies that show that people who practice their faith live longer, happier, healthier lives. They're more generous, they're more ethical, they're more tolerant. The list goes on and on and on, and yet there is kind of a negative feeling, and I think it's reflected in the accounts that we read. Not that there aren't stories out there that are horrible stories. I just think we need to do a much better job of getting some of the other evidence out there that for some people, faith and things that come with faith are really important for folks. You know, I was telling the students today, if you look at those who practice their faith and you're white, it adds 7 years to your life expectancy. And if you're African American, 14. And so I've never seen it in a headline, I've just read it in studies. But I would think that would be something worth telling people about. So we just need to be more attentive to how you share kind of the good news. There is plenty of good news. Thank you.
Why did the gang allow them to leave just because they became ministers?
Yeah, well, you know, it wasn't that they became a minister, it was that they had what they thought was an authentic conversion, and that they were going to practice their faith. And which was interesting, meaning we're going to keep an eye on you. And if we find out that you're not authentic with this faith, then it's all over for you. Now that's what we've been hearing. Is it actually true? I don't know that it's true. Because once you're in the game, you're in the game, right? And you can't get out. That's the problem. And so if we are able to do the study, it'd be interesting to find out, is there really that kind of surveillance going on? And do they really care? I don't know the answer to that.
So they may or may not go to that trial.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're hearing. And some professors from a university, Florida International, went down and they did some reconnaissance, and they came back and they said they interviewed 1,100 of these guys. Now, I haven't seen the study published, but it was funded by the U.S. government. And so I did look at the report that they put together. So there probably is something going on there, but we just need to know more about it. But one thing I do know is that it's primarily inmate-led. So what we're thinking is there could be this whole indigenous offender-led thing taking place. And typically, of course, it takes the form of offender-led gangs in prisons. So there's this bad way of looking at it, but what if you could look at it in this other more pro-social way? How might inmates be able to help us in moving forward, just like addicts are helping us figure out how to beat addiction? Questions? Now, I don't want to indicate that these are simple problems. As we've discussed all day, these are really complicated problems that we're all trying to deal with. Yes, ma'am?
Can you help us translate this into West Virginia and the drug problem that we have here, and how we might go about using this to help with that?
Yeah. Well, you know, for about an hour, some religious leaders and I had a conversation before this event this evening, and we were talking about that issue. I don't have a way for us to fix what's happening here in West Virginia. You know, it's not unique. It's happening in so many other communities where people are just absolutely devastated. We need to think of ways that we can address issues that are affecting us, like social isolation. You know, there's a sense in which, you know, Marty mentioned this new book on The Quest for Purpose. The reason why we did that book was we were funded by Templeton to study why college students cheat. And we kind of backed into the book, because what we found was that students that have purpose in their life don't cheat. And students that lack a meaning and a purpose are the ones that feel there's nothing wrong with cheating. And so, you know, how can you translate that? Well, maybe it's the same thing. People that find themselves in a pretty hopeless situation, instead of getting connected, isolate themselves. And, you know, some of the easiest things to do when you isolate yourself are just to look inwardly and medicate. And they can do that. And of course, it's a tragic downward spiral. And so more isolation leads to more despair. And so that's why it's absolutely so tragic what we're seeing. And I think that this idea of looking at others being other-minded, this is where these offenders are actually giving us a glimpse of what's wrong. I mean, we live in a society, I think, where people are too, especially among millennials, they're very self-absorbed. They may not want to hear this. But as people become other-minded, you're able to be, you change. That's where we find the identity transformation taking place. People didn't know they were changing until people told them they were different. And so somehow we need to think about ways in which we can help move us from a continually fragmented society. Is that easy? No. The rabbi, wherever the rabbi is sitting, was telling me, even in the Jewish community here in Charleston, over the last 3 decades, there's been changes. And a lot of this is in the family and the extended networks of the family. And that's why I'm thinking one of the powerful things is this sense of community that these congregations have. And these networks of support that are in those congregations, which brings accountability. And we have a new grant that we just got. We haven't even really got started on it, but it's a grant on accountability. So we're going to be studying the general population in the U.S. through Gallup surveys, but we're also going to be studying offenders, looking at human accountability and transcendent accountability to see how open people are to being accountable to God and to others. And I think this may be helpful too as a part of figuring out how do we deal with this terrible problem of social isolation. So I think one of the things that Bob Putnam at Harvard talks a lot about is social capital. What is social capital? But it's being in trustworthy relationships with other people. That's what social capital is. And how do we take a society where we used to be, we used to bowl together, we used to be in all kinds of leagues, and the numbers of kids that are in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts has gone down dramatically in the last several decades, but they're not the only organizations that are experiencing this. So what does this mean for the future if those kinds of organizations go out of business? To me, it's a scary thought. And so is there a way in which congregations can think more intentionally about these things? I sure hope so. I had a student say today, what good are churches if we've got one on every corner and they're not doing anything right now? Well, I think that they are probably doing a lot. A lot of it goes unrecognized about what congregations are already doing. But I do think congregations don't know how to address issues like addiction. And they feel overwhelmed by it like most people do. So there needs to be ways in which congregations can get in the game that they're not in the game. As I was saying to someone earlier, we didn't talk about divorce in the church either, but now that's open game. We're trying to help people recover, but we're not doing it in these other areas of addiction, and I do think that that's a place that's right for congregations to address as best they can. I mean, if they are on every street corner, let's take advantage of them. I'm all for exploitation at that level. How are we doing on time?
Time for one more question. Anybody would like?
Have you found any examples of congregations stepping out with open arms, receiving inmates that do get parole from the Bible studies and inviting them into the community to grow them up?
Yes. Thank you. There are many congregations that go into correctional facilities to work. It's safe. You get to go home at night. Working with inmates that are just out of prison is another thing altogether. It's much more difficult work to do. And that's a big area for us to do better in. Are there congregations that are working in that space? Yes. They tend to be small. It's the kind of congregation where we've got 30 people and we expect that you're going to do this kind of work, and if you're not, go find some other congregation. It's that serious. So there are congregations in Dallas, a number of congregations that have been building halfway houses for guys, and then helping them with job placement and job training, not at the scale of the Prison Entrepreneurship program. But that's really difficult work, and there'll be a lot of failures along the way, but we need to do it. And as I said earlier, and in our meeting, mentoring is a huge piece. I mean, these guys desperately need mentors. They've never had them. They don't know what it's like to live on their own and to have a bank account and to write a check. So for them, family life skills that's just something that you take for granted that we can't. And so they need mentors. A lot of guys are willing to mentor inside the prison, but then when it comes on the outside. I had one mentor, and I said to him, I go, how did you let him relapse? He goes, well, you took him to a crack house. He goes, I didn't know it was a crack house, you know? He's from Katy, Texas, outside of Houston. He doesn't know what a crack house looks like. So I think some of the mentors actually tried their best. They just weren't up to it. It's a different thing to go into a project, to work with an offender one-on-one when they're out of prison, than it is to go into a controlled environment and work with them. We have people that are willing to. They need to be trained. That's the other thing too. This isn't for everybody. I mean, this can be really, really difficult work. And we need to be prepared to not do so well. And if we don't, then we double our efforts. We don't throw in the towel. The stakes are too high. So I know that you're struggling in this community. I'm glad that you're talking about it. Some places don't even talk about it, they ignore it. They know it's there. So that's a big step in the right direction. And what a beautiful place you live. And so I look forward to being in touch with you all. I'll be in touch with Marty and with Ed, and if we have any studies that come out that might be useful, we'll make sure we pass them along your way. But thank you for having me this evening.
Byron, thanks again for being here. It's a really informative and insightful presentation and discussion. This is presentation tonight, and Byron's time on campus throughout the day was supported by the Sims family. So we're very grateful for their continued support of the Sims Speaker Series and the opportunity to bring folks from outside of our community here to help us learn and to help us grow. And also want to thank my assistant, Susan LePew, with all of the logistics coordination, and my friend and colleague, Ed Welch, who was instrumental in identifying Dr. Johnson as a great person to come to campus, and indeed he was. So thanks so much, Ed. So thank you all for being here. Have a great evening, and we look forward to having you back on campus again soon.